Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of April 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by Alex Thomson, bringing us Eastern approaches from the Netherlands.
We'll get straight on with it because we've got a lot to get through once again. Latest numbers on cases for COVID-19, 2.5 million global cases. 178,658 deaths, 704,067 recoveries, and that leaves us with 1.692 million active cases, 1.635 considered mild, and 57,216 considered serious or critical. Now, yesterday the Office for National Statistics released their latest release, which brings us up to the 10th of April. Now, remember that the difference between what they're publishing and what these figures that I've just given you are that the Office for National Statistics is recording people that have been registered as having passed away. So these are a few days behind. So this, as I say, brings us up to April the 10th. Well, it appears that for week 15 up to April the 10th, we now have a pretty huge gap between what would be expected and what has actually happened. So that's apparently 8,000 extra deaths. Is that correct though? Well, actually, if you take out the people that didn't die from, let me rephrase that. If we take out the people that didn't die with COVID-19, that it turns into this, so significantly less. And in fact, if you note that on the spreadsheet that they produce, they say deaths could possibly be counted in both causes presented if a death had an underlying respiratory cause and a mention of COVID-19, then it would appear in both counts. So in that case, if we take the simplest thing, which is to remove the people with respiratory problems from this, then in fact we find that people that the Office for National Statistics at least are implying have died of COVID-19 is something similar to the peak in January. Still, nonetheless, we have to ask, all these extra people that apparently haven't died from COVID-19, how has this happened? Well, perhaps we get a clue from Mumsnet, because of course this is one of the big online forums out there. So let's just have a look and see what somebody's saying here. Lockdown hospital, half empty. Some wards have less than a handful of patients. Some wards are closed. Most staff have been moved to wards so are falling over themselves. They're complaining about there being no activity in the hospitals at all.
It also says there, Mike, A&Es are very quiet.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is something that's been being reported to us for a number of weeks. Well, if we scroll, you saw the number of comments here, all from people working in the health service, all reporting pretty much the same thing. Somebody here saying, my best friend who's a consultant in a large hospital in the south, not London, related the exact same thing to me yesterday. She said they're finishing their ward rounds by 11 a.m. and are twiddling their thumbs pretty much of the time, feeling guilty about being clapped for every Thursday. So this seems to be a common thread, Brian. The BBC and other mainstream media outlets, when they discuss the excess mortality for week 10, when they were discussing it yesterday, weren't asking the right questions, weren't getting to grips with where these extra deaths are coming from. And what we're finding is that people are not getting the hospital treatment that they are normally expected to get. They're not getting cancer treatment. I know anecdotally of people now who are not getting the drugs that they require. So some people aren't getting painkillers. Other people are getting lesser doses of painkillers. I know one person who's had their normal drugs changed to drugs sourced from Russia. Right. And so they're being told by the pharmacists that there is short supply on the drugs that they need. So most people, it seems, most of the excess deaths, which are not COVID-19, are people that are dying at home. And this has to be addressed. These are people that are dying of the lockdown. Now, we've been making this point for the last couple of news programs, but it has to continue to be made because nobody's addressing this from the government or from even in the mainstream press.
That's absolutely correct. And to be ruthless, Mike, I'd have to say to you that all this information that's come in from real human beings to you, from nurses, from people related to people working in the NHS, all of that information, according to the BBC, is valueless. You shouldn't pay attention to it. It's come from an auntie or an aunt or somebody connected with them or somebody you know. Don't take any notice. You think I'm joking? Have a look at this. This was BBC trending a couple of days ago. It's saying coronavirus, here's how you can stop bad information from going viral. Before you forward it on, ask some basic questions about where the information comes from. It's a big red flag if the source is a friend of a friend or my aunt's colleague's neighbour. We recently tracked how a misleading post from somebody's uncle with a master's degree went viral. Some of the details in the post were accurate, some versions encouraged hand washing, but other details were potentially harmful, making unproven claims. And then the key bit from the BBC: the most reliable sources of information remain public health bodies like the NHS, the World Health Organization, or the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the USA, says Claire Milne, deputy editor of UK-based fact-checking organisation Full Fact. And the comment is, experts are not infallible, but they are more reliable than a stranger's distant relative on WhatsApp.
Oh, they're much more reliable there, Brian, it looks
Well,
like.
I find this article from the BBC appalling. This is the lady that they're quoting. What do we really know about her? Well, she's clearly very young. She's done a bit of work in health and social care, but there's no proper medical qualifications given. But notice at the bottom, she's also appeared on BBC Live sessions talking to schools about how to spot misinformation. So what the BBC is saying is experts make mistakes. Don't worry if those mistakes are killing people. You shouldn't worry about that, Mike.
No, of course not.
Just accept the experts and don't pay attention to real human beings. That's how it works. And this is from one of the journalists that produced that disgraceful article. This is her Twitter page, Mariana Spring. And if you go on it, she's crowing that she's reported about people running local Facebook groups who are fighting misleading coronavirus information from their sofas. They've stepped up as a social media site, as they admit it's not easy to contain the wave of misinformation.
Is she talking about Bellingcat?
Well, who knows? I mean, it's outrageous. I emailed her. This is the email I sent. I said, we've read your article, but why isn't the BBC reporting what fully qualified and senior medical people are saying to challenge the COVID-19 statistics? Why is the BBC not reporting that Bill Gates has direct financial links and interests with Imperial College and Mr. Ferguson's organisation? So we gave them all the detail. And of course, what happened? What was our response? Well, it was just silence. So the BBC now just saying to you, you've got a loved one or a friend or a colleague who is a professional and works in the NHS. Don't believe a word they say, just stick with the BBC. To which we say, if you're listening to this report from overseas, please realise that at £4.3 billion, the BBC is now the world's biggest propaganda machine. And we just follow on with The Guardian. So we've got nurse shortage causes Nightingale Hospital to turn away patients. So we build a 4,000 bed facility, Mike. It treats maybe about 40, possibly 50 people. But the reason that the COVID patients aren't in that unit is because we haven't got enough nurses. And this lady did get back in touch with me and said, did you read my article? And I did read the article. And of course, what she does is just says what the NHS told her. But we're supposed to believe that hospitals working at minimal capacity, to the extent we've got nurses dancing in empty wards, have not got enough nurses to come into that 4,000 bed unit, and it's redundant. This is not journalism.
Indeed. Well, for UK column members, on Monday's UK column extra, we were talking a little bit about the situation with respect to China and the rhetoric that's building up for war with China, it seems. A couple of days ago, the Henry Jackson Society in London was holding a virtual conference which they called the Atlantic Alliance during a new age of great power competition. So this is, let's just introduce the conference with this.
So what are we going to discuss today? Well, you might have noticed that China and Russia have both used the coronavirus crisis to indulge in forms of narrative projection. Great power competition is therefore alive and well, even during an international emergency. This has been played out in Europe, with Russia and China clamoring to show their willingness to provide assistance that has often come with strings attached. So our panel today is going to look at what this new era of great power competition, or wider state competition in British government parlance, means for the Atlantic Alliance in a broader sense. But this competition will outlive coronavirus, just as it was there before the disease emerged in China.
So before I go into some of the details of what some of the delegates said on this, Alex, let me welcome you to the program and say, what are your immediate thoughts on that little intro?
That it was scripted, Mike, that it was being read in an inauthentic manner from a script, because we could see the presenter, whose name eludes me because I haven't come across him before, although I tried to follow the Henry Jackson Society. He seems to be casting his gaze downwards. The point at which his voice rose most was when he was talking about narrative projection. Now, think tanks of the kind of Anglo-American type, like the Henry Jackson Society, often talk about narrative and amplification and projection. We see that with the Integrity Initiative, which got derailed last year. That was all about stopping Westerners who were amplifying Russian and Chinese messages. I think an older term for amplifying and projecting is simply called stating one's opinion, isn't it? I think the so-called narrative that Russia and China are being very bad by projecting is simply reporting the developments in the world as they see it, obviously with government interests. But the last time I looked, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Republic of France, all of these countries had state communication units. In fact, they employ top professionals in them, don't they?
Well, we might even call one of them the BBC, but let's look at what some of these people were saying. So this is Jakub Janda. He's Executive Director of European Values, which is a Prague-based group. Well, they're mainly arguing against China's 17+1 infrastructure projects in Eastern and Central Europe. He said that talking about China's 4 objectives in Central and Eastern Europe, which breaking relations with Taiwan, the fact that they're trying to get Huawei's 5G in to spy on everyone is really what China's about in Eastern Europe, according to him. And he wants everybody to, he's saying that China wants everybody to stop complaining about human rights in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and in China generally. And he says that China is wanting to force blame on anyone other than China for the COVID disaster. So he compared, this is what he said, what China is doing is like Russia when they were caught shooting down MH17. They then try to shift the blame onto everyone else. Then they had John Hemmings, who's from the Henry Jackson Society himself. He's saying that the Belt and Road is aimed at establishing total control over what everyone in the West does and everyone in the West says. And he said that the reason that they're pushing Huawei systems isn't just commercial. They want to establish total control in Europe. So this was the narrative that they were pushing, Alex. And it's not just them. Of course, here is The Hill, which is a big publication in Washington, D.C. Kissinger's folly, the threat to world order is China. And they're saying, China is basically responsible for the virus. China has to be dealt with. It's all Kissinger's fault for building up this relationship with China and trying to bring China into the what they describe as the world order. Well, coming back to the Henry Jackson Society for a second, on their website, they're pushing this narrative, coronavirus. It's a pity they can't spell coronavirus, but anyway, they're pushing coronavirus compensation and the idea that China needs to take responsibility for this, and that really there has to be some kind of pushback from the West on China. Well, China's response is this. This is the Chinese Foreign Ministry response. Did anyone ask the US to offer compensation for the 2009 H1N1 flu, which was first diagnosed before breaking out on a large scale in the US and then spread to 214 countries and regions, killing nearly 200,000 people? AIDS was first reported, he said, in the US in the 1980s and then swept across the world, causing untold suffering for countless victims. Did anyone come forward and ask the US to be held accountable for that? And then just to end this little section before I bring Alex back in again, just coming back to Jakob Janda then during that Henry Jackson Society virtual conference, saying this is a new Cold War, whatever else you want to call it, between China and the free world. It's already here. Now, Alex, something one of the other major think tanks produced recently was this was RUSI, a document suggesting that proxy wars are the way forward. We really need to have many more proxy wars in the world. Syria, a great example of a hugely successful proxy war from RUSI's point of view, and we need more. So my question to you, Alex, is, are we looking at a Cold War? Is that what we've got at the moment with China? Or actually, are we heading in the direction of some kind of hot war, either directly or through proxies?
Well, the Cold War analogy, of course, Mike, comes from the 1940s onwards and has to do with containment of the Soviet Union, largely by the United States and secondarily by its European allies. Perhaps a more apt analogy would be the mid-late 19th century one of the Great Game. At the time of the Great Game, of course, Britain was squaring off against Russia in Central Asia, and particularly trying to stop Russia from forging alliances with the countries of mountainous inner Asia, which would allow it to form a land bridge with India. And the British Empire's fear was to wash Russian boots in the Indian Ocean, as the phrase used. And that was a major vector behind the First World War, even though Britain ended up fighting on the same side as Russia through various intrigues. Now I think what's going on is more of a great game of Anglo-American policy elite against China. I would be the last to exonerate China for its various abuses, particularly towards various kinds of religious believers and political dissidents. But having said that, I always want to go on and say I do not believe most of those who bang the drum for prisoners of conscience in China, because very often they turn out to have different agendas from what naive Christians or libertarians assume. Why do I say great game? Because something that leapt out at me from your last segment there was The Hill, and I think Henry Jackson is society is in this bracket too, but certainly some of the Washington players blaming Henry Kissinger, who, as we all know, came out of Germany and who's been accused by many, with varying degrees of credibility, of being a post-war Nazi plant or Third Reich plant in the United States. If that is what's breaking surface now, then we're seeing something very old reviving. We're seeing the Rhodes-Milner Club of the 1870s, which aimed to harness itself to America, to hitch itself to America's underbelly, really breaking surface in Washington and saying we do not like the way that America went in the entire 20th century, which is too friendly towards the Eurasian powers. We want it to flip back to the 19th century idea of ruling the world together with Britain. And that would perhaps explain the war drums being banged against the Chinese and Russians.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, I was just going to say, but the Russians are okay if they're providing us with medication that we wouldn't have or have otherwise in UK.
Well,
Mike.
apparently.
Yeah.
Right. Well, look, I've got some good news now, because Prince Philip has weighed into the whole discussion, and this is what he had to say as we approach World Immunisation Week. I wanted to recognise the vital and urgent work being done by so many to tackle the pandemic. So just in case people don't know that World Immunisation Week is on the cards, here it is. Hashtag vaccines work for all is the message of World Immunisation Week 2020. It runs from the 24th to the 30th of April 2020. So that is the theme. And the campaign apparently will focus on how vaccines and the people who develop, deliver and receive them are heroes by working to protect the health of everyone, everywhere. So that should make you feel much better, Brian.
Well, he's just the man, but I'm surprised he was out because he's over 70 and I think he should be in lockdown, shouldn't he?
But you've got to remember, of course, it's amazing that he said this, because he has said in the past he wants to be reincarnated as a virus so that he can wipe out large proportions of humanity. But anyway, going on, the WHO and partners are saying that they are going to demonstrate the value of vaccines for the health of children, communities in the world. They're going to show how routine immunisation is the foundation for strong, resilient health systems and universal health coverage. And they're going to highlight the need to build on immunisation progress while addressing gaps, including through increased investments in vaccines and immunisations. So we should be celebrating that.
Well, celebrate.
Yeah, okay, we'll do that. Okay, now, if you like what the UK column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. There are options for helping us out there, and your help much needed and much appreciated.
And I'll just add at that point that we're speaking to Ian Crane, and I have to say conversations we've had with him in the last couple of days, his voice is much stronger, mentally he's absolutely there. He's recovering from the quite severe operations that he's had, and he's certainly not out of the woods, but just wanted to say that Ian is in a good state of mind and he's fighting all the way. He's also praising the NHS staff who's been treating him, and he's also commented on the fact that some staff are having to work exceptionally hard, but it's quite clear that other areas of the hospital are quiet, I think. So let's have a look at strange things going on, and thank you very much to viewers who pointed this out to us, and they're pointing at Porton Biopharma, which is a company operating from Porton Down, developing and manufacturing life-saving products. I found this intriguing because that wasn't the Porton Down I remembered, but there we are. So Porton Biopharma is working together with Public Health England and US company Blue Willow Biologics to develop the next generation of anthrax vaccine at PBL's facilities at Porton, Wiltshire, UK. This program is currently funded by the US government and is worth up to 14 million. Now, the intriguing thing is that the Secretary of State for Health in the official capacity is the major stakeholder in the company. And so this is one of these strange companies that you think you're looking at one thing, but then it turns out to be something rather different. And if you have a look at a bit more of their detail, they're very big on explaining that they're now operating on a campus. So it's all rather like a university. Presumably all the military stuff has gone, and they're working to protect us. I don't know, Alex, whether you'd like to comment on it at all, but these very strange quasi-government private companies have popped up everywhere.
You know, the idea behind this, of course, is the social enterprise, although I can't think of anything less social than a killer bug. But we've seen it with the idea of Mindspace becoming the government's nudge unit. Often these kind of laboratory of ideas spin-offs come out of the Cabinet Office or one of its underbelly agencies and groups. And the idea is that the intellectual property remains that of the government, even when it goes into the private sector, which is a very questionable and understanding of international of intellectual property law. But there you have it. It's very difficult to know what this is. Is it the third sector? Is it the third and a half sector? Is it a fourth sector? Perhaps deliberately obscure.
Fusion might be a good word, Alex.
Yeah,
that might be exactly it. And it's also a question of who is, graduating from these programs and what credentials they have. I mean, earlier in the news you mentioned that somebody on the BBC was telling us not to listen to those with master's degrees. Instead, we should listen to public health experts. But one of the main points made by the retired chief EU epidemiologist on an interview which we have transcribed from another news source and put on our website on the front page, one of the main points that retired chief epidemiologist for the EU makes is that public health is itself a community. How do you get into public health these days? Well, people can use a search engine and look for masters of public health. People get a master's degree because it's a profession. It's not public service anymore. It's a clique.
Yeah. Well, we've got a section here having a look at where COVID-19 is really taking us. And again, a big thank you to our audience who are sending us material, some really great research being done. Let's have a look at what viewers and listeners are discovering for themselves. So this is the Telegraph. UK's Onfido secures $100 million to boost ID tech for, quote, immunity passports. British startup Onfido has raised $100 million. it's going to create immunity passports for governments battling coronavirus. So where are we going post COVID-19, Mike? It's very clear we're going to have passports, and either those passports are going to be fully stamped up, and possibly we will be let out of our rabbit hutches and allowed to do things.
So this won't be to cross a national border, this will be to cross the border of your home into the public spaces?
Possibly, for example, you would not be able to go into a pub or a restaurant unless you got one of these passports. So no, it doesn't have to be travel even. It could be just going into public spaces. So let's carry on, because this company is very, very interesting. Here's City AM. British AI startup Onfido in talks to provide coronavirus immunity passports. And there's a very loving picture of the company. So here's a bit more detail. It says that it's in a position to provide, or looking to provide, these immunity passports when, quote, lockdowns begin to ease. So we can see how this is dovetailed in. The entirety of Onfido's new stake comes from US investor TPG Growth's 45 billion fund.
Hedge fund there.
Hedge fund there.
Excellent, yeah.
Right. And then it mentions the founder, Hussein Kasai, and we're going to have a look at him in a second. But it's using its cash mostly to bolster its presence in the US. But as you'll hear in a minute, they're very big on what they're doing in Europe. Now, some really excellent information sent to us from Asian Voice here. The typeset very small, so I've taken the trouble to blow a bit of it up for you. This gentleman was born in Manchester. His family moved to Iran. He grew up there. Then he came back to the UK. He starts an eBay business at 12, as you do. He then works at Marks and Spencer's. He studies economics and management at Keble College, Oxford. Then he was active in the Persian Society, Oxford Development Abroad, and the Oxford Entrepreneurs Society. And he founds a tech company called Onfido, and he gets a grant of 12,000 in seed investment from the university, moves to London, couple of friends, and in no time at all, you've secured a mere 60 million from investors, including Microsoft.
Good.
And I believe I'm correct in saying around this time, Bill Gates was still directly connected with Microsoft, but we know even though he's semi-distanced, he is very much a Microsoft man. So what does Hussein say? He says that Onfido's in talks to help governments get people back to work after coronavirus infections peak by providing proof somebody has recovered from the virus. Governments are now wondering how to attach a test result to somebody's identity so you can prove you're immune. And there was detail in the article which said that Onfido's platform uses machine learning to verify a person's photo ID and match it to their face using biometrics. And we just do the second one here. Nothing has been agreed, but we've submitted proposals across European governments. The first priority is to roll out lockdown testing that's scalable and effective. Next is the ID piece. This is really dangerous stuff. And I look at this young man and I don't get a bad impression from his face. I think that he's been groomed by the establishment to set this up. Alex, just ask you for a brief comment and then I'll carry through with a bit more detail on this company.
What struck me there, Brian, is the name, Onfido or Onfido. It doesn't mean anything, but if you add a C to it, it's the Latin verb confido, meaning I confide in, I have faith in it, I have confidence in it. So does Onfido mean take it on faith, take it on trust, or does it mean I do not quite have confidence?
Well, who knows, but certainly we know that many of these companies like their sort of occult elements to their logos or statements about the company. With that in mind, let's follow it through because we've got the company itself talking here. And what are they saying? Well, basically, if we bring in a little bit of detail, they're talking about another $50 million. And it says it's raised 50 million, bringing the total investment to the company to over 100 million. The round was led by SBI Investment and Salesforce Ventures with support from M12, formerly Microsoft Ventures. So remember Mr. Bill Gates that we've been showing has got a hand in most pies around the vaccines. Here's M12. Let us help you win. We're reinventing corporate venture capital. So I think this is a very, very dangerous organisation, and it's looking essentially to give us an ID card. We have to prove we're clean, healthy animals, and if we do that, we may be allowed to socialise. And this young gentleman thinks he's helping mankind. Brilliant.
Well, when Vanessa Bailey was on the programme on Wednesday last week, she gave people a warning that she was about to write an article, and here it is, the first part of this, who controls the British government response to COVID-19, and she is indeed talking about Onfido amongst others, well, one of the things she is pointing out in this article is the role of Neil Ferguson, and of course Neil Ferguson from Imperial College in 2001 behind the foot and mouth disaster in this country. In 2002, she's making the point that Ferguson predicted that up to 50,000 people would die from variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This is mad cow disease. And Ferguson suggesting that 150,000 would be the case if the epidemic expanded to include sheep. The reality is somewhat different, though. 178 people have died from VCJD since 1990. Then in 2005, Ferguson was claiming that up to 200 million people would be killed by bird flu. That's H5N1. And by early 2006, the World Health Organization had said 78 deaths from that virus. So he didn't get that one quite right either. In 2009, then, he and his team at Imperial College were advising the government that swine flu would probably kill 55,000 people in the UK. And the end, that was 457. And of course, now we've got Ferguson and Imperial College right behind the COVID-19 thing. So this is the first in a two-part series giving a very good overview of the situation.
Yeah, sorry, Mike, who was the person in the foreground in that picture?
Well, that's he's missing in action, whoever that is. I can't quite remember his name. It's quite so long since I've seen him that I'm not sure.
I think he was the British Prime Minister, but he seems to have disappeared. Alex, can you help us out here? We're not sure. Boris, was it?
The problem with that image, Brian, is that the image is half cut.
Yes, okay, we shall move quickly on.
Right,
what's next?
Let's give you a little bit more factual detail about the empire around viruses. Do it quickly because time is running on. Thank you again to a viewer who said, were we aware of NERVTAG, the new and emerging respiratory virus threats advisory group? This is a subset of SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. We've mentioned SAGE in several of our reports about COVID, but we weren't aware of NERVTAG, and going to encourage people to research this themselves. A long list of names of people, the great and the good, and apparently the knowledgeable and the experienced involved, none of them fully accountable to the public. Certainly not if you don't know they're there, but we do now. You can have a look at their interests, and I give the site credit for that you can pull up their register of interests, and there's a lot of detail, so I'm going to encourage people to do that. And then if we have a look at some individuals, this is Professor Horby. I just found it interesting that he's connected through to Isariac, and that will link through to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this revolving door of Bill Gates' money equals power and influence in world health goes on unabated. And if you want to know about this Azaric, well, here's their webpage. And of course, we've got the vulnerable young child on the front. They love children. And where does it link you back to? Well, it's the University of Oxford, where they've got an article, 4.5 million award for clinical research consortium to tackle global threat of epidemic infectious diseases. And it's there in University of Oxford. And where's the money coming from? Well, as they say, funding over the next 5 years from the Wellcome Trust, the UK Department for International Development, and Bill and Melinda Gates. So wherever you look for the British government, you find Bill and Melinda Gates. So that image that's been used, absolutely perfect. And just to rub it in, this is from outsourcingpharma.com. Gates Foundation enlists Novartis, GSK and others in COVID-19 fight. So Bill Gates is the spider at the center of the web. How does he run his web? It's through the power of raw money, no question of it.
Now, in our coverage over the last couple of weeks, the name Gavi has come up, and Vanessa talks about Gavi in her article as well. This is the Vaccine Alliance. And Alex, we have been given a little bit of information that we want to see if people can help us confirm.
Yes, it regards diplomatic status for Gavi. Gavi calls itself Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. We don't know whether this organization uses that name or some related name for this purpose, but a very good source in Europe has tipped us off that Gavi has sought or possibly already been awarded diplomatic immunity, and that would be a lack of liability for prosecution. And that this would apparently have been done in Switzerland, most likely then in Geneva or Basel, where the international organizations are. So if our viewers would like to do some digging for us in clean and above board ways to find out whether any of the key names or sub-organizations within Gavi have a registered premise in Switzerland, particularly one that's been had its status changed recently, that would be of high interest to us, together with the question, of course, what is it that Gavi wish to avoid being prosecuted for?
Yes. Okay. And Alex, moving on then, the Dutch Health Ministry doesn't seem to want anybody asking questions at the moment.
The Dutch Health Ministry is led by Hugo de Jonge, who recently took over from the previous health minister who collapsed behind the podium at the early stages of the COVID epidemic with apparent exhaustion, toppled over backwards, poor man. Hugo came into his slot. He was previously the Minister of Social Welfare, where, as we reported last year in both English and Dutch, he apparently tries to bring in the Scottish Government's failed named person scheme, a state guardian for every child, and this after the UK Supreme Court had ruled that the scheme was not just unlawful, but tyrannous. Well, anyway, we've got Hugo de Jonge now saying that because of a loophole in legislation, wherever you find Freedom of Information Act, you find loopholes, he's going to put a blanket ban on his ministry answering Freedom of Information requests sent to it on the basis that the law allows him to do so, where it would be an unreasonable burden. The unreasonably burdensome get-out clause has been invoked on everything, every FI request made to the Dutch Ministry of Health until the summer at this rate. And as we've put on screen here, perhaps the leading professor of the relevant branch of law in the Netherlands, that's Professor Wim Voermans of Administrative Law at Leiden, has said that the Ministry of Health seems to have battened down the hatches. This is entirely unacceptable. Without Freedom of Information requests, there is no democratic oversight. A big shock to the Dutch because, of course, they go for a fairly pure Napoleonic law model. They believe very strongly in public accountability, and the branch of law that deals with this, administrative law, regards itself really as the saviour or the champion of the interests of the common man against overbearing government. So we shall see who wins this struggle, the law establishment or the new political establishment.
Can I just add a quick bit there, Alex? Suggest people have a look at the Global Fund, which provides a lot of the money for medical organisations, because they have also secured immunity from prosecution. And the other organisation, of course, is the Bank of International Settlements, which has given itself huge immunity from any form of investigation or prosecution. So immense power in the hands of people who want to be completely outside of the law.
Okay, so let me just briefly run through a couple more sort of COVID-related news items. This is Stanford Professor of Medicine, John Ioannidis, and a new article, interview, published on Monday, and he's talking about the lethality of COVID-19, saying it's in the range of seasonal flu for people under 65 years of age. He's saying the mortality risk, even in the hotspots like Italy, is comparable to the daily car ride to work. So he continues to speak out on this issue. We've got a news release here from the director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford, who's saying that the damage caused by the lockdown would be greater than that caused by the virus. That's that particular one. I apologize, I got that in the wrong order. This one is a new serological study in Los Angeles, saying that 28 to 55 times more people had COVID than previously recognised, and so the death rate has to be taken into account there. Then we've got nearly a third of 200 blood samples taken in Chelsea. This is in Boston. This is the Boston Globe. Show exposure to coronavirus, suggesting that, again, much broader infection rates than previously acknowledged. Also in Boston, the CDC reviewing stunning universal testing results from Boston homeless shelter. This is basically saying that over a third of the people tested positive there. So that seems to tally with the previous article. Then we've got the Herald from Scotland. Nearly half of ICU beds empty. Well, we've covered that previously.
But the BBC doesn't understand this, Mike. Apparently.
No, it's very, very strange, isn't it? And then we have this one. This is the German microbiology professor Sukhrat Bhakti. Another interview. This time he's arguing that he's really criticising the media for its coverage. He's calling it completely irresponsible, and I think that's absolutely right. So let's move on to this. Now, Alex, I've been wondering for a little while what the response was going to be from the legal profession to the emergency powers that the government passed a few weeks ago. Well, we've now got a legal opinion from field court chambers. And they're saying that the lockdown measures imposed by the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England regulations are some of the most extreme restrictions on fundamental freedoms imposed in the modern era. They are a disproportionate interference with the rights and freedoms protected by the European Convention on Human Rights and therefore unlawful. So they're using the European Convention of Human Rights as opposed to looking at the implications for English common law, which is perhaps unfortunate, but nonetheless, it's a legal opinion. And so let's have a look at the areas that they're particularly interested in. The regulations gravely impact a number of rights and freedoms, including at least to family and private life, that's Article 8, religious practice, Article 9, association and assembly, Article 11, property, Article 1 of Protocol 1, education, Article 2 of Protocol 1, and they're saying probably also liberty, which is Article 5. And they go on to say it is submitted that the 5 tests of the continuation of the regulation, this is the 5 tests that the government are saying need to be passed before they will lift these regulations. A, impose an over-rigorous and unreasonable fetter on the government's discretion to remove or reduce the restrictions and are wholly incompatible with the application of the Syracuse principles. B, would, if applied, retain the restrictions if, for example, there was not a sustained and consistent fall in the death rate, even if an objective evaluation showed that less restrictive measures might have the same object. And C, fail to require the Secretary of State to have any regard to the impact of the regulations on the important rights and freedoms they restrict. So, Alex, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this, but I'm pleased to see at last a legal opinion coming out from at least one chambers.
It's better than nothing, Mike. Very briefly then, the ECHR, which has nothing to do with the EU, was really a Churchill initiative to make sure that geographical Europe, and in fact it's all the countries in Europe now, bar Belarus, were signed up to a minimum standards of human rights and law, which was justiciable, which could be tried in court in Strasbourg. Now, this Chambers has gone the ECHR route because, of course, legal training for half a century has not focused on the common law and constitution in the old-fashioned way. But it's better than nothing. The trouble is, as you put up on that last slide, how are these rights or the infringements of them tested? The jurisprudence goes into principles, right? So a bunch of judges who often are activists of low repute from their own countries get appointed to the ECHR. There, they have to use a bunch of principles. There's no juries involved. There's no common man saying this is not right, this is an injustice. It's a bunch of judges saying, well, there's previous form that this proportionality test is met, and the British government can then revoke all your rights. Because in any international document, certainly one signed in the 20th century, you don't have God-given rights. You have rights until the government decides it's necessary and proportionate to take them away.
Yes. Alex, you wanted to highlight a warning from Lord Hailsham.
Here is Lord Hailsham's book written the year I was born, The Dilemma of Democracy. His birth name was Quintin Hogg, and people may remember him because he lived on till 2001. He was a very high-ranking law officer under various conservative governments, although I'm not taking up the Conservative Party's cause, because most of our liberties were lost under their government. But at least when he was Lord Chancellor from 1970 onwards, he was at least a champion of common law and the British Constitution and inalienable rights. And his warning, which viewers have been reminding me of recently, was in a Sunday Times article just when he had taken over under the new Heath government that brought us into the EEC. Here it is: "It is the parliamentary majority which has the potential for tyranny." And this was really setting the tone for his Lord Chancellorship, which he then resumed under Mrs. Thatcher for most of the Thatcher government till 1987. And in fact, one of the chapters in this book, which made a deep impression on me and my father when I was younger, talked about Parliament as an elective dictatorship. That is the problem, and in order to unpack it, people are going to have to look beyond 20th century doctrines of, parties are wrong, we have to vote in another bunch, the old Churchillian idea of kick the buggers out and get a new bunch in. We're going to have to look beyond that to holding our parliamentary public representatives to account, and I'm afraid that means the party system itself and the whipping which it inevitably involves is the root of the evil, which even Lord Hailsham didn't see.
And if we could just end on this one, Alex, then, because you made the point to me earlier before the programme on human rights and vaccination that the United Nations is suggesting that perhaps mandatory vaccination may not be compatible with the idea of human rights.
Far from it. So on the left, there's the United Nations access page, which people can easily find for perhaps the biggest declaration of all, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1946, very much the same time as the ECHR was made, but it has no teeth, it has no court. And by the way, even the ECHR doesn't really have any way of imposing sanctions on governments that have been ruled against, but at least it's there and it's respected. And that talks in many sections, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, about family life, the right to work, the right to be unmolested. More particularly, however, UNESCO, the United Nations relevant agency for this domain of life, came out with a bioethics statement in 2005, which specifically addresses the integrity of the body. And Article 8, Part 1 of this UNESCO declaration, or is it, yes, it is Article 6.1, I beg your pardon, says any preventive, diagnostic and therapeutic medical intervention, i.e. vaccines is covered, is only to be carried out with the prior, free and informed consent. That requires the media to be free, of course. Informed consent of the person concerned, based on adequate information. That's actually in the UNESCO statement as well. The consent should, where appropriate, be expressed. So, for example, 10-year-olds upwards in the developing world should be required to say or sign where they can write, "I do accept this." And the consent may be withdrawn by the person concerned, not a guardian on their behalf, the person concerned, at any time and for any reason without disadvantage or prejudice. That seems pretty cast iron, although it's only a statement by UNESCO. It's not an international law level codification, but it seems pretty express that nothing is going to be injected into the body of a child, an adult, an old person, a disabled person, a mentally insufficient person without free, informed consent.
And what is, just in a word then, what prospect do you foresee us having that our own government would be maintaining the spirit of that?
None whatsoever, because members of parliament in the whipped party system form a clique together with public administrators of different disciplines, such as public health professionals, journalism professionals. It's a collegial club, right? They don't represent us anymore in their own conception. They represent the public administration to us. They are party representatives to us. And if they are ever challenged on things they don't understand and don't read, like UNESCO statements and declarations of rights, they go and get parliamentary clerks or their party whips or back office people in the cabinet office to tell them what it's supposed to mean in the new interpretation. They will not take our word for it.
And somebody's just said in the chat box, I'll take it at face value, there's a court case about this, is Gillick versus W. Norfolk 1986. So people might like to check that and check it's accurate and relevant. I think that brings us to the end of the news. Alex, I'm going to thank you very much for joining us. Several people saying, what on earth do we do? Well, the key thing is you have to do something. Get those letters written, get emailing, get calling. tweeting to ask the questions of the MPs and get them working properly, and of course challenge all the information that is clearly fake, whether it's coming out from the BBC or the British government itself. Enough people murmuring their protest will actually be quite a sizable level of decibels. So action conquers fear. And I'll end by saying that aside from Ian Crane's welfare at the moment, we can also say that Melanie Shaw is doing quite well in Rampton Hospital, but of course they're under severe lockdown due to COVID-19 at the moment. That's it. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.